right, so any questions up to here? All right. So that's the basic gameplay. This is a project that can be a lot of fun to write. Okay. If you're panicked, if you only have a day left and you haven't started yet, it's not going to be a lot of fun to write. But you've got a week and a half to spend on this. It's a group project, so you're allowed to talk to people in your group for help, and it can be a lot of fun. If you structure it right, it becomes easier and easier to add more and more stuff to this. If you want to highlight the last line that was drawn, if you want to color code the initials and change this to match the color, assigned to a player and so on, all of these embellishments become pretty easy to add in once you have the framework set up. Okay. So I want to go through and talk about this. But any questions about the behavior of this, about what it's supposed to look like? And I'm not at all concerned about how you get the players' names, how you display the score, how you tell me whose turn it is, and so on. As long as that information is in there, okay, you can style it however you like. You can use whatever interaction mechanisms you want. You prompt the user for how big the grid is. I don't, but you could do that. That would be fine. So I've got it hardwired to an 8x8 grid, and each box is 50x50. But you can totally make those variable. I would say have a default though. Have an option for the user to specify, but don't force them to specify. Okay. I want to be able to just run your main program dots and have it start playing with me. But yeah, that would be cool to make it variable. You could also make it so it automatically adjusts based on how big the frame is. So lots of options. And you could have an exit button. I just hit the X up here to get out. Alright, so that's the basic setup, okay? PA4. You cannot really do this on the Linux server though, not easily. Okay? Because we're using something called X Windows. All of this visual, the visual elements being created by your program are using something called X11. Okay, it's a very old, powerful, very stable feature. I was using X11 in the 90s, right, early 90s. It's been around forever. It works. It doesn't change. But it lets you basically control somebody's display, read their keyboard, read their mouse, things like that. And if you're running code on the Linux server, how does it know what your mouse is, what your keyboard is? When you SSH to Linux, right, all I'm doing is I'm connecting from somewhere and that I might not have access. To do that. Okay. Are we not going to be working on this in Eclipse? Yes, you are. So you can develop it. I recommend developing it in Eclipse, but you don't have to, right? If you want to work on the command line, that's totally fine. I'm not going to bring it up in Eclipse because if I do, I'll accidentally show my source code. But yeah, do it in Eclipse. So you don't need a Linux environment, right? You just need Java and Eclipse. All right, so you're going to write a computer version of the game named Dots. Write it in Java using the string package. Work in Eclipse. Your code has to work standalone in the end, though. Okay, so so in the end, I want a bunch of Java files. And I want to be able to compile these and then just say Java dots and have it run your code. Okay? And you want to test that and make sure that works. So come out of Eclipse before you submit and make sure you can do this. Okay, so the program allows two people to share the mouse and display, take turns drawing lines using the mouse. The program draws the lines, checks for legal moves, completes boxes, adds initials, figures out whose turn it is, tracks the score, and knows when the game is over. This may leverage into PA5. I haven't decided yet. Okay, but I might do something that takes this further. Okay, so here's a description of dots, but we've already seen it on paper. All right, let's talk about the group aspect. I will let you work alone or in groups of 2 or 3 people, no larger. Okay, 3 is the absolute cutoff. But here's the thing, I do not recommend breaking the problem up. Don't think of the group aspect as cutting down the amount of work you have to do. Okay? Because everybody in the group is responsible for knowing how to do every part of this assignment. You're going to see this stuff on the final exam. You're going to see this stuff in PA5. You're going to see it next year in other courses. So don't just say, I'm going to do the graphical part and you can do the mouse part, right? What I recommend is everybody writes this in its entirety, okay, start to finish. But use the fact that it's a group to say, hey, legally I can talk to this other person in my group. I can tell them what I'm stuck on. I can look at their code. I can ask them to help me debug. Okay? So the group aspect lets you work with 1 to 2 other people that you decide ahead of time, right, to help you with writing the program. But really, really, really try to make sure that every one of you is writing the whole program from start to finish. If you don't quite understand the graphics thing, you definitely want to work on that. Okay? Don't just say, well, you do the graphics thing. Make sure that you understand it. Okay, that's the absolute best way to learn this stuff is by writing code, and this is a nice compact assignment that hits all these different aspects of code. All right, submission. I'm going to say either make sure only one person submits their GitLab repo, right, which you can do by just not adding me as a reporter unless you're the designated person who's turning it in, or make sure that all the repos are consistent. Okay, basically when I grade, I just say download all the repositories I have access to, and then I start going through them and grading either forward or backward alphabetical usually. If you have 2 people in your group who submitted and made me a reporter, the first one I come to, that's the one I'm going to grade. And if that's got the broken version of the code, then you're all going to get graded on broken version. Okay, so figure this out ahead of time, and either make sure only one person makes me a reporter, or make sure that everybody's code matches in the end, right? Or that everybody's code is equally good for grading. And then in the top of every single .java file, put the name of all the group members. Full names, no initials, no abbreviations or nicknames, please. Everybody's full name who's in your group. That's what I'm going to use to distribute the points. Right, so I grade this code and it's worth 95 points. I'll look in one of the Java files and see who gets those points. Okay, is that clear, the submission part? Alright, requirements. So, board should be 8 by 8. Okay, 8 dots by 8 dots. Sorry, 8 boxes by 8 boxes. I'll have to clarify this. Yeah, so 8 boxes by 8 boxes is actually 9 dots by 9 dots. I'll update this and clarify that detail after class. Alright. So your board is 8 by 8. Each box should be 50 by 50 pixels. Okay? But don't hardwire those. Make them variables in your code so that it's easy to change. Especially for debugging, right? It's easier to play out a 4 by 4 or a 2 by 2 game than an 8 by 8. Okay? Let people enter their names somehow, right? But not by typing on the command line. I want everything to happen in the graphical element. Okay? So you can use text fields, you can use edit fields, but something in the playing area, right? Let them enter their names, hit a start button to begin the game, tell me whose turn it is, display that in some way. Can we implement the grid with a nested list? I don't see why not. So I used a 2D array, but yeah, list of lists would be fun. Can we, oh yeah, definitely make a dark mode. Absolutely. Alright, clicking the mouse inside the grid area should draw the closest line. Okay, so don't make them connect the dots by dragging or something. Just click somewhere, it figures out the closest line to be drawn and it draws it. Okay, and if that line is already drawn, tell them that and let the person try again. And then automatically the game should notice if a box or more than one box has been completed. Sometimes drawing a line will complete more than one box. Okay, they should notice all the new boxes, put the current user's initials in those boxes, and then let it continue being that player's turn. Report the score somewhere on the display, and then when all the boxes are filled in, say either who won or that there was a tie, and have some way to restart the game. Either after the game is done, or if you want to give up partway through and just start over again, have some kind of restart button. Alright, good so far? Anybody know what SOPs are? I just got an email saying how to write SOPs that avoid human error, which is kind of funny because I'm teaching 250. But this is like a 90-minute live webinar, and I don't think they're talking about sums of products. Industrial organizational psychologist with 20 years experience. Cool, okay. SOPs are a lot deeper than I realized. Alright, let me go back to my chat. There we go. Standard operating procedures. Most likely that as opposed to sums of products. I should join their webinar and ask about like min terms and max terms. Okay, suggestions. Alright, so before I decided this was going to be your assignment, I coded it up myself to see, what was involved in making this happen. And I thought about a lot of different ways to go about this, and there are some ways that are maybe straightforward logically, but pretty complex to implement. Okay, I found a way to implement this that I think is straightforward and not too painful. Okay, actually pretty simple if you do it right. Okay, and I want to talk about this, and I'll be talking about this over the next few days. You are not required to do it this way. If what I'm going to say makes no sense to you and you already know in your head how you want to implement this, go for it. Okay, there's a lot of ways to do this, but here is a set of suggestions that from experience I can tell you should work well and not require, you know, writing thousands of lines of code, and not be a nightmare to debug. Okay, so general comment to keep in mind. Okay, this is event-driven code. We're not looping. We're not, you know, in a loop saying, you know, have you clicked the mouse yet, and so on. We mostly do nothing. When an event occurs, which is mostly going to be a mouse click, we're going to set things up so that a section of code starts to run. And really all we're going to get in that section of code is XY coordinates. Okay, or maybe if we want a modifier button on the click. But mostly you've got to think of this as, you know, all the action starts from this program you're going to write that gets called with XY coordinates. And from just that, you've got to do all of these things we're describing for the gameplay. Okay? And then when you're done, you need to return and let the system go back to waiting for more events. So you can't do infinite loops in your mouse handling code. Okay? That will break the JVM. You get a mouse event, your code starts to run, it's told the XY coordinates of the click, you do your thing and you return. And you wait for the next time to be called. Okay, that's a really different mindset that takes a while to sit with and sort of think about how can I do what I want in that kind of setup. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, remember you don't get to call paint whenever you like. If I'm in my mouse routine and somebody just clicked their mouse and I do my math and I say, oh, there should be a line between this point and that point, I can't just say draw a line. Okay, all I can do is say repaint, and repaint will cause paint to be called, and paint has got to be the thing that draws that line. And remember that just because I'm drawing a line between two dots doesn't mean my previous line should disappear. The paint method has to redraw all of the lines that have been drawn before, plus the new line, plus any initials that belong in boxes, plus any new initials, plus any information that I want to display about score, whose turn it is, and so on and so forth. All of that's going to go inside your paint method. So paint is one of two main pieces of code in this whole thing. It does all of the display of your playing area. Okay. The other main chunk of code is what fires when you get a mouse click. Okay, and those two have to get connected to each other. Alright, so this brings up this notion of make sure you ask questions. Okay, we'll go through all of this in class, but it's not going to click the first time. Okay, and you want to think about this stuff as soon as possible. You want to start writing code. Don't get locked on a whiteboard, right? Start writing code, but if you reach a point where it's like, I really don't see how to connect this to that, right? That's when you come and you ask questions, either in class, office hours. Email works, but email is getting really hard to do right now because I'm getting bombarded by all of my classes. So more and more I'm asking people to talk to me in office hours. And office hours are getting more and more crowded also. 8 hours a week sounds like a lot, but it's getting trickier. So, you know, more reasons to ask earlier rather than later. All right. So the board. Okay. My suggestion is make yourself a class named box, which describes one box in the playing area. Okay. And then make your board just a 2D array of boxes, or some other structure. If you want, you know, a doubly linked list of linked lists, that's fine. I wouldn't do it as a hash because hashes don't have, you know, notions of who's next to who. 2D array works fine though, but make sure you have a separate class called a box, okay, or something like that. And for my box, I had a set of booleans, one for the top, bottom, left, and right, indicating whether or not a line has been drawn. Okay, so, and again, not required to do this. Right? And my idea is that this, you know, is one, so here's my collection of dots, right? Any one of these is an object of type box. So if I have an 8x8 array of boxes, right, each box corresponds to one of these boxes on the playing field. And my Boolean variables tell me, is there a line drawn on the top, the bottom, the left, and the right? Okay, what does that do for me? Well, it lets me know when somebody clicks if that line has already been drawn. I can say that spot's taken. If it hasn't been drawn, I can simply set this to be true in this box, right? And in my paint method, I simply go through my 2D array, and for each box, I check to see if top, bottom, left, and right are true, and if they are, I draw the corresponding line wherever the top, bottom, left, and right of the box would be. Yes, we are sharing sides with other boxes, so this is one really important note that I'll come to in a minute. Well, I guess I'll come to it now, right? The top of this box is also the bottom of that box. So if somebody clicks right here and my code, you know, the mouse handler says, oh, I should fill in the top of this box, you also need to look at the box above you and mark the bottom of that as being true. Okay, and that's really important. And there's a special note about that in the write-up. Same thing if there's a box to the left and you click on the left edge, go to that box on the left and mark the right edge of that as being true. So this is about data, okay? Think about this not as a visual program, but as a program that manipulates data in memory. Okay, that's the real key to making this flow. Don't think about it as, you know, dots and lines and initials. Think of it just as data. And what is my data? Well, for me, it's an 8x8 array of boxes. Okay, where box is, you know, a type of object. It's a class. And when you click the mouse, I adjust fields inside the box. I also have a character field. I called it who, which I set to the initial of who owns that box. And every time that I adjust a box, I check to see if all four sides are filled in. And if they are, and if nobody owns that box right now, I set the initial to whoever the initial is of the person who just clicked the mouse. So if it was Larry's turn, and my code decided they clicked right here, and I draw this line, and I set bottom to be true, now I check to see if top, bottom, left, right are all true, and if they are, I'm going to change this to be Larry's initial. Alright, I'm updating memory. I can play this whole game without ever painting anything, because I'm keeping track of everything inside this two-dimensional array of boxes. If I want to know what the score is, I make a pair of nested loops. I go through my 2D array, and for each box, I check who owns it. If it's player 1, I bump up player 1's score. If it's player 2, I bump up player 2's score. And then I can display that. If I want to know if the game is over, I can just take the two player scores, add them up, see if it equals the number of boxes. So if I have 64 boxes, if the scores add to 64, the game's over. Otherwise, there's still lines to be drawn. Okay, so you want to think about this in terms of memory. Okay, it's a data structure. For me, it's just a 2D array, but it's still a data structure. But think about this as something that interacts with memory. And then the paint method has a really simple job. Pair of nested loops. Go through, and for each row and column, look at that box object. If top is true, draw a line wherever the top of that box is. If bottom is true, draw a line where the bottom is, and so on. If the character is not blank, use drawstring to draw that character in the middle of the box. So the paint method is also just reading this memory structure and going through and processing it. Okay, that kind of separation is going to be really important. If you get things tangled up so that, you know, inside your mouse handler you're trying to update the score and figure out, you know, initials and all this kind of stuff, it's going to get really ugly. It's not going to be any fun. Okay, if you break these into functions, if you modularize, right, it's going to make life easier. And a big part of modularizing is thinking about, you know, the painting and the mouse handling as totally separate things. Okay, so some examples of modularization. Make a method for initializing the game board. Okay, why? So that when you want to hit the reset button, you can just say, you know, initialize game board, and you don't have to remember all the things that you have to do. Make a method for updating the score. Update score. And now, you know, somebody clicks the mouse, call update score. Somebody hits the restart button, call update score. Right? Game first begins, call update score. And anytime you call update score, it's just going to cause the score area of your display to say score, you know, player 1 such and such, player 2 such and such. Make it a method, and you just call it whenever you think the score might have changed. Make a method to see if a click is legal, and if it is, update the game board array and adjust whose turn it is. You can put that all in one method, and now inside your mouse handler you just say, you know, handle XY click, and it takes care of everything. Make a method for everything that you can think of doing that makes sense, okay? If you've got 5 things you have to do, don't necessarily make 5 separate methods if they all correspond to one thing. And this is part of the style, this is part of the experience of being a programmer, right? Technically the whole thing is one function, it's playing the game of dots. So should I just make everything one method? Well, probably not, right? But if I need to, you know, see if top is true or bottom is true or left is true or right is true, I'm not going to make 4 methods to do that, right? I might make one method called, you know, is box complete, and, you know, I could put that in the box class if I wanted, and then if I have a box, I could say if, you know, b.complete, and that could return a Boolean telling me if all of these are set to true. If box owned, well, that could check to see if my who character is, you know, set to a space or set to a letter. So think about modularizing, right? Not just for the sake of modularizing, but for the sake of pushing off code that will complicate your loops and your handlers, pushing that code off into other spots where it belongs, right? What do I want to do when I get a mouse click? I want to know if that spot is taken. Well, I could write a function, you know, which says if taken. I want to know if I've just completed a box. Put a method in your box class that says, you know, if box completed, and so on. So keep thinking about modularizing, all right? And that's where I say this gets to be more and more fun at some point. Because now if you want to add something else, chances are you don't have to write, you know, 20 lines of code. You just have to call a few methods to do other things. If you wanted to make an undo function, right, how would you do that? Well, you could take your whole structure, which is stored in a 2-dimensional array, and you could push that on a stack, right? And every time that the board updates, you can push the current board on the stack, and now if you want to undo, just pop off a previous board from the stack. Well, if the entire state of the game is stored in this 8x8 array of boxes, if I restore that 8x8 array of boxes to a previous state, I've done a time reversal, right? I've gone back to an older state of the game. And when update score gets called, it will go through here and figure out what the score is and update that, right? So modularize, all right? All right, mouse clicks. When the user clicks the mouse listener for the game area should pick up the XY coordinates, decide which box was clicked in, decide which side it corresponds to, and then act accordingly. Okay, and we'll talk about how to do that shortly. Once deciding which box was selected, the program will see if that line's already been drawn and report an error if it has. Otherwise, it will set the appropriate booleans in the box, and then update the boolean in the appropriate adjacent box. Okay, and that's critical. Your code will mysteriously not work if you don't do that, and that's not hard, right? If you find that this box is row column, right? So like right here, if you click the left, go to column minus 1. So this is going to be row column minus 1. This is going to be row column plus 1. This is row minus 1 column, and this is row plus 1 column. Just thinking of 2D arrays, right? So if you click left in here, set right in that. If you set right in here, set left in that. If you hit top, set bottom. If you hit bottom, set top. But make sure this exists. If I'm in column 0, there is no column minus 1, right? So don't try to set the box in column row minus 1, right? Because you'll probably null pointer except, well, you'll index out of bounds exception. Okay, but again, throw that into method so it's not cluttering up the rest of your code. Okay, and then after each click, call Repaint, and Repaint should, update the scores and do all this other stuff. Okay, drawing the board, again, mouse clicks do not draw on the board. They update the array in memory and the score and so on and so forth. And then the Repaint method will cause paint to be drawn, and paint eventually will eventually draw the board. And again, to draw the board, just loop through your structure of boxes, draw the appropriate lines, fill in the initial if somebody owns it using drawstring. Alright, and again, Modularize, have fun with this, okay? It's a group project partially because, it's going to take a long time to write. It's straightforward. That doesn't mean that it's going to be done in 20 minutes, though, okay? It's going to take a lot of parts and pieces, at least a few hundred lines of code. And it's more fun to code with a friend, right? I think so, at least. So get some Git habits going for collaborating if you like, and get some good Zoom set up, or Hangouts or whatever, and spend some time working on this, but try to have fun with it. Alright, grading. So 100 points total, broken down as follows. If I can download your Java files and compile them, you get 15 points. If the game actually starts, draws a field of dots, and shows some sort of initial score, that's another 15 points. If the users can enter their names, and those initials get used, like in the score display, that's worth 5 points. Okay. If the game responds to mouse clicks, that's worth 15 points. So if I click somewhere and it draws a line in some random location, you still get 15 points. Okay, as long as you're picking up mouse clicks. So you've got half your points for pretty nominal behavior. Okay. The other half comes from reliably drawing lines based on where the mouse is clicked, and we'll talk about how to figure out which line to draw. Preventing illegal moves is 5 points, okay, which means if I click outside the field, I should not draw a line, outside the playing area, and I shouldn't let somebody take a line that's already been drawn. If it figures out when a box has been completed and adds initials to that, that's worth 10 points, and if it keeps track of whose turn it is, tells me whose turn it is, and makes sure when somebody completes a box it stays their turn, that's worth another 5 points. Okay, if it reports the score correctly, that's 5 more points, and if there's a button that lets me restart the game, that's your final 5 points. Alright, so basically implement it, to do the basic things, it's 100 points. Okay, I am not giving or taking away points for coding style this time. I think people's coding style has gotten really good. Okay, so keep it up. I'm not going to spend points on it, but that doesn't mean, coding style is suddenly not important. At a university, you're definitely going to be graded on coding style, indentation being consistent, and commenting being well done. So keep that up, okay? The PA3s I looked at, it was looking really good, so nice work. All right, and then finally submission. Do not use anything other than the default package in Eclipse, okay? We have not done anything other than the default package in Eclipse. So if you're doing what we've been doing in class so far, you'll be fine. But if you go to Stack Overflow and you start reading, it's going to say, you know, always use your own package. It's important. If you do that, I'm not going to be able to grade your program. Okay? So use the default package. And to make sure, right, test your code outside of Eclipse before you submit, or before you're done submitting. So pull your code out, compile it on the command line using just the Java command, Java-C, and then run it with Java. Okay? If you do it on the Linux server, it'll compile, but it won't run, but you should get this error. Okay, that error is fine. If you get an error saying cannot find dots.class, right, that's a problem. Alternatively, if you push your repo early and ask me to, 48 hours before the deadline or more, I will be happy to try and run your code, okay, and make sure that it's submitted correctly. And it doesn't have to be, you know, the complete version if you just want to know, am I doing this the right way? Because you're going to have to go into your file system, pull out the .java files, and then push those over into Git. Okay, so I'll be happy to look at what you're submitting up to 48 hours before the deadline and let you know if it's something that I can grade. All right, that was a lot of talking for 5 pages. Hopefully that's a complete exposition on PA4. Any questions right now? All right, good then. So I will get PA3 graded sometime over the next few days. It may not happen today, but sometime over the next few days, worst case into the weekend, I'll get those graded and get comments back to you as soon as I can. All right, have a good afternoon. I will see you next time.